History remembers rulers for their triumphs, and for their horrors. Some are hailed as visionaries, others condemned as tyrants, but few are remembered as both, a genius of statecraft and a monster of cruelty. Ivan IV of Russia, better known as Ivan the Terrible, was the first man to ever call himself Tsar, a word that meant Caesar, ruler, absolute sovereign. He built the foundations of the Russian state, expanded its territory, and centralized its power, but he also drowned his reign in blood. He unleashed secret police to terrorize his own people, slaughtered entire cities, and committed atrocities so savage that even his name, Terrible, is less an insult than a warning. This is not the story of a king or an emperor. This is the story of a child broken by betrayal, who became a man consumed by paranoia, a man who crowned himself with divine authority, and then descended into madness. This is the story of Ivan the Terrible, Russia's mad Tsar. Ivan was born in 1530, in the gilded halls of the Kremlin, but his birth, though celebrated, was shadowed by fate. His father, Grand Prince Vasily III, died when Ivan was only 3 years old. His mother, Elena Glinskaya, ruled as regent, but in Moscow the scent of power was poison. Boyars, the noble elite of Russia, despised the young heir. They saw Ivan as weak, vulnerable, and easy to control. When his mother mysteriously died, perhaps poisoned, Ivan was left orphaned at the age of 8. From that moment his childhood was not one of royal privilege, but of humiliation. The boyars seized power, fighting among themselves while Ivan and his younger brother Yuri were neglected, even abused. Servants ignored them. Food was sometimes withheld. Ivan later recalled being mocked, starved, and beaten. And yet, while the boyars treated him like a pawn, Ivan learned. From a young age he watched the nobles claw for power, betray each other, and commit atrocities with impunity. He studied not just the scriptures and chronicles but also the art of cruelty. It was here that Ivan developed two traits that would define his reign: a deep, burning hatred of the boyars, and a belief that power could only be secured through fear. But Ivan's hatred did not remain hidden. Even as a boy he acted out his cruelty in shocking ways. Chronicles describe how Ivan, still a child, would take animals, dogs, cats, birds, and throw them from the Kremlin walls just to watch them suffer and die. These acts were not the mischief of a spoiled child. They were the early signs of a psyche twisted by trauma, a boy who learned that to survive in a world of predators, he had to become one himself. The boyars saw him as fragile, but inside Ivan's heart grew hard, cold, and vengeful. By the time he was a teenager, Ivan had one thought burned into his mind: he would reclaim the power stolen from him, and when he did, he would make those who had tormented him suffer. In 1547, at just 16 years old, Ivan made history. Previous rulers of Russia had been called Grand Princes of Moscow. But Ivan had bigger ambitions. He declared himself Tsar of all the Russias, a title derived from the Roman Caesar, signaling absolute authority and divine right. The coronation was a lavish ceremony in Moscow's Assumption Cathedral. Ivan was crowned with the monomax cap, blessed with holy oil, and proclaimed not merely a prince but God's chosen ruler on earth. To his people this was a moment of unity and strength. To Ivan it was vindication. No longer the helpless boy mocked by nobles, he was the Tsar, the anointed sovereign, and his power was absolute. But beneath the ceremony lay ambition and vengeance. Ivan saw himself as more than just a ruler. He was a messianic figure, destined to expand and purify Russia, and anyone who stood in his way, even his own people, would pay in blood. At first, Ivan seemed a ruler of promise, not terror. Guided by his devout Christian faith and perhaps by the stabilizing influence of his first wife Anastasia Romanovna, Ivan embarked on a series of reforms. He convened the Zemsky Sobor, a kind of parliament bringing together nobles, clergy, and townsmen. He introduced a new legal code, the Sudebnik of 1550, tightening laws and reducing corruption. He restructured the military, creating the Streltsy, a standing army of musketeers loyal directly to him, not the boyars. He even expanded local self-government, granting towns more autonomy in managing affairs. For a brief moment it seemed Ivan might be remembered as Ivan the Great Reformer. But behind these reforms was a calculating mind. Ivan was not handing out power, he was centralizing it. Every change weakened the boyars and strengthened the Tsar. And while he appeared stable, calm, even pious, the seeds of cruelty were still there, buried but waiting. All it would take was tragedy to bring them roaring back to the surface. That tragedy came in 1547, only months after Ivan's coronation. On a hot summer day in June, a fire broke out in Moscow. Fueled by wooden buildings and strong winds, the flames spread rapidly. The city was engulfed, thousands perished. Churches, homes, and palaces were destroyed. The devastation was unimaginable. In the chaos, rumors spread. Many whispered that Ivan's maternal relatives, the hated Glinskys, had started the fire through sorcery. The people's anger boiled over. A mob rose against the Glinskys, dragging them from their homes and slaughtering them in the streets. Ivan, watching this chaos, saw the truth he had always known, that Russia was a land ruled not by love, but by fear. From this fire, both literal and symbolic, Ivan's darker side began to take control. He would rebuild Moscow, yes, but he would also build a reign of terror. The boy who had once thrown animals from the Kremlin walls was now a Tsar, and soon he would throw entire cities into the fire. For a time, however, Ivan's cruelty was restrained. Much of this credit goes to his wife, Anastasia Romanovna. Unlike the treacherous boyars, Anastasia was a source of stability, love, and comfort for Ivan. By all accounts, he adored her. She softened his temper, soothed his paranoia, and gave him airs. With Anastasia by his side, Ivan continued to strengthen Russia. He launched successful campaigns against Kazan and Astrakhan, expanding Russia's borders eastward. His people hailed him as a conqueror and a god-anointed ruler, but fate once again was cruel to Ivan. In 1560, after 13 years of marriage, Anastasia fell ill and died. Ivan was devastated. He believed, and perhaps not without reason, that she had been poisoned by the boyars. Whether this was true or not, it did not matter. Her death shattered him. The fragile peace within Ivan's mind collapsed. His grief curdled into hatred. His paranoia grew uncontrollable. And the mask of the reformer slipped away, revealing the monster beneath. From this moment on, Ivan's reign would descend into blood, terror, and madness. The boyar lords who once starved and mocked him would soon feel his vengeance, and all of Russia would tremble. The year was 1565. Ivan, broken by Anastasia's death and convinced that treachery surrounded him, made a shocking move. He suddenly abdicated the throne, retreating to a monastery. He announced to the stunned Russian people that he could no longer rule a nation poisoned by treachery, but it was not surrender, it was theater. As panic spread, the people begged Ivan to return. He agreed, but on one condition: absolute power. He demanded the right to rule without the interference of boyars, to confiscate land, to punish traitors as he saw fit. And so the Oprichnina was born. The Oprichnina was not merely a policy, it was a state within a state. Ivan divided Russia into two parts: the Zemshchina, ruled by traditional boyar structures, and the Oprichnina, ruled directly by Ivan and his chosen enforcers. And those enforcers were like no others. They were the Oprichniki, Ivan's personal secret police clad in black, riding black horses with the severed heads of dogs dangling from their saddles as symbols of loyalty. Their mission was clear: root out treason, crush opposition, and enforce the Tsar's will through terror. Wherever they rode, they brought fire, torture, and death. The Oprichniki were unlike any force seen in Russia before. Their black uniforms, shaven heads, and grim insignia marked them as a breed apart. They swore absolute loyalty to Ivan, not to law, not to church, not to God, but to the Tsar alone. They patrolled the streets like predators, hunting whispers of dissent. Nobles were dragged from their homes in the dead of night. Families were broken apart. Villages burned. The Oprichniki were not merely executioners, they were torturers. Their methods were infamous. Victims were flayed, boiled alive, or impaled. Entire estates were confiscated, their wealth poured into Ivan's coffers. The boyars, once proud and arrogant, now lived in terror. The same men who had mocked the young Ivan, who had dismissed him as a powerless child, were now brought before him in chains. And Ivan did not forgive. Some were tortured for days. Others were executed in grotesque public spectacles. Families of the accused were not spared. Wives, children, even servants could be slaughtered. In Ivan's mind, every boyar was guilty. Every noble was a traitor. And through the Oprichnina, he would cleanse Russia with fire and blood. Ivan's paranoia knew no limits. Even within his own court, fear reigned supreme. He would test his courtiers with impossible questions, punishing hesitation with death. At feasts, Ivan sometimes forced nobles to drink until they collapsed, and then beat them to death with his own hands. His cruelty was theatrical. He delighted in watching fear spread like a disease. To him, terror was not merely punishment, it was governance. And yet, behind this madness lay a twisted logic. Ivan believed that by crushing the boyars, by destroying their power and instilling fear, he was protecting the state from betrayal. He saw himself as God's chosen instrument, purging corruption from Russia, but in truth, his reign of terror hollowed the state from within. Nobles who might have governed wisely were executed, farmers fled their lands, villages were abandoned, the very foundations of Russia trembled under the weight of fear. The climax of Ivan's madness came in 1570. Suspicious that the wealthy city of Novgorod was plotting to defect to Lithuania, Ivan decided to make an example. With thousands of oprichniki at his back, he descended on Novgorod like a storm. For 5 long weeks the city was subjected to unimaginable horror. The oprichniki dragged entire families into the icy waters of the Volkhov River, where they were tied together and drowned. Priests were beaten and tortured, their churches looted. Monks were burned alive in their monasteries. Ivan himself supervised the atrocities, watching with cold fascination as the executions unfolded. Estimates vary, but historians believe between 10,000 and 60,000 people were killed in Novgorod. The massacre was not just a punishment, it was annihilation. The city's economy collapsed, its culture gutted, its population decimated, and yet, in Ivan's mind, this was justice. He saw Novgorod's suffering not as cruelty but as a warning to all of Russia. Betray me, and I will erase you. The massacre of Novgorod remains one of the darkest chapters in Russian history, a testament to the depths of Ivan's paranoia and the scale of his cruelty. Novgorod was the most infamous atrocity, but it was far from the only one. The oprichnina turned all of Russia into a haunted land. In towns and villages, entire populations vanished. Merchants were ruined, trade collapsed, peasants starved. And still Ivan's paranoia grew. He saw treachery everywhere, in boyars, in peasants, even in the church. The Metropolitan of Moscow himself, Philip II, dared to criticize the oprichnina. His reward? He was strangled to death by the Tsar's men. Even Ivan's own family was not safe. In 1568, he ordered the murder of his cousin, Prince Vladimir of Staritsa, forcing him to drink poison. He exiled and executed relatives, wives, and servants. Each act of violence seemed to feed his paranoia, not ease it. He grew convinced that his enemies multiplied in the shadows, that betrayal lurked behind every smile. The Tsar of all the Russias had become a man consumed, by fear, by rage, by madness, and Russia bled for it. The oprichnina lasted 7 years, but its scars remained for centuries. Economically, Russia was devastated. Farmlands lay abandoned, trade routes collapsed, and famine stalked the land. Politically, Ivan had destroyed the boyars, but he had also destroyed trust, stability, and the fabric of governance. Socially, fear became the defining reality of Russian life. Families whispered in their homes, never knowing if the oprichniki would come at night. Children grew up in terror of the Tsar's name. By the early 1570s, even Ivan realized the oprichnina had gone too far. He disbanded it in 1572. But by then, the damage was done. Ivan had proven himself capable of controlling Russia through terror, but he had also hollowed out the very state he sought to strengthen. And his descent was far from over. For the most shocking act of Ivan's cruelty still lay ahead, not against enemies, not against boyars, not against peasants, but against his own blood. Even as decades passed, the ghost of Anastasia Romanovna lingered over Ivan's court. Her death had been the turning point, the moment when Ivan transformed from a harsh ruler into a monster. Ivan's obsession with her memory was twisted. He remarried again and again, perhaps searching for her likeness, perhaps desperate to fill the void. Some say he married as many as 8 times, though the Orthodox Church condemned his serial unions. Many of these marriages ended in tragedy. Wives were accused of infidelity, treason, or witchcraft. Some were beaten, others were sent to convents, and still others disappeared entirely. No woman could soothe Ivan's paranoia. No wife could replace Anastasia. Her absence became a festering wound, a wound that spread into every part of Ivan's life, poisoning even the bonds of family. The most infamous moment of Ivan's madness came in 1581. The story is chilling. One day, Ivan's eldest son and heir, Tsarevich Ivan Ivanovich, confronted his father. The young Tsarevich was passionate, intelligent, and deeply loyal to Russia. He often clashed with his father's brutality, urging moderation and protection of the people. But on this day the clash turned deadly. Accounts differ, but the most common version is this. Ivan's daughter-in-law, heavily pregnant, had appeared in public dressed in a way the Tsar considered inappropriate. Furious, Ivan beat her savagely, causing her to miscarry. The Tsarevich, horrified, confronted his father in defense of his wife. In a rage, Ivan struck his son with his iron staff, a heavy rod he carried as both weapon and scepter. The blow was catastrophic. The Tsarevich collapsed, blood streaming from his head. Ivan's fury evaporated instantly, replaced by horror. He cradled his dying son, weeping and wailing, screaming for forgiveness. But it was too late. The Tsarevich died, leaving Russia without its most capable heir. It was a moment that shocked even Ivan's hardened court. The image of the Tsar, wild-eyed, grief-stricken, clutching his dead son, became a symbol of his reign. In that single blow, Ivan had not only killed his child, he had killed the future of Russia. After the murder of his son, Ivan was never the same. Guilt gnawed at him. His temper, once terrifying, now veered between fits of rage and bouts of despair. He grew more paranoid than ever, convinced that demons haunted him, that shadows whispered betrayal. Physically, too, the Tsar was crumbling. Years of stress, rage, and illness took their toll. His body swelled, his skin broke out in sores, and his strength faded. And yet, even in decline, he clung to power with iron hands. He continued to purge nobles. He continued to extract wealth from a starving people. He continued to fight wars, though by now his campaigns were often disastrous, draining the treasury and exhausting his armies. Russia staggered under his rule, but Ivan would not release his grip. In his last years, Ivan lived almost like a ghoul. He surrounded himself with astrologers, witches, and holy men, desperate to divine the future and cling to power. He obsessed over omens and visions. He had lists of enemies drawn up, even as his body betrayed him. And yet, he still played the role of Tsar with ferocious pride. He continued to dress in regal splendor, continued to enforce rituals of absolute obedience, continued to present himself as the chosen ruler of all the Russias. But inside, he was a man haunted by Anastasia, haunted by the thousands he had slaughtered, haunted by the Novgorod massacre, haunted most of all by the ghost of his son, the heir he had murdered with his own hand. Even in his private chambers, Ivan reportedly screamed and wept at night, as if battling unseen demons, and perhaps he was. On March 18, 1584, Ivan prepared for a game of chess. By now he was bloated, weak, and often bedridden. Yet he insisted on maintaining the routines of a Tsar, even the leisure of a nobleman. As he played, he suddenly collapsed. Some say it was a stroke. Others whisper of poison. Still others claim it was the final judgment of God on a man who had brought so much terror to the world. Ivan the Terrible died that day at the age of 53. His body, when laid in state, shocked all who saw it. His face was distorted, his skin discolored, his frame swollen. Even in death he seemed more demon than man. Russia mourned, but the mourning was laced with relief. For with the death of Ivan IV, the reign of terror was finally over, but the chaos he left behind was only beginning. Ivan the Terrible's reign was both creation and destruction. He had centralized power, broken the boyars, expanded Russia's territory, and forged the foundations of the Russian Tsardom. He was the first to call himself Tsar, the first to claim the mantle of Caesar for Russia, but his methods were catastrophic. He ruled by fear, not trust. He destroyed entire cities, massacred tens of thousands, and turned his nation into a land of suspicion and bloodshed. The murder of his son left Russia weakened, paving the way for the time of troubles, years of famine, civil war, and foreign invasion. And yet, Ivan endured in memory. To some, he was a tyrant, a madman, a butcher. To others, he was a visionary, a man who gave Russia the strength to survive in a brutal world. But in every tale, one truth remains. Ivan was terrible, terrible in his wrath, terrible in his vision, terrible in the legacy he carved into the soul of Russia. His name still echoes through history, a warning, a shadow, a curse. The Tsar who ruled with fire and blood, the mad ruler who drowned his land in terror, the man who was and remains Ivan the Terrible.